an impenetrable fortress, surrounded by reinforced concrete walls and high-strength steel, towering watchtowers, checkpoints at every entrance, and an army of guards ready to respond with lethal force. This was no ordinary prison. This was Puente Grande. Considered the most secure facility in Mexico, it housed the most feared criminals in the country. 2 guards per inmate. It wasn't just a safety measure, it was a warning. Because in those cells didn't sleep common criminals, but leaders of organizations with thousands of heavily armed men under their command. Puente Grande operated like a military base. It wasn't just about locking people up, it was about containing men capable of unleashing full-scale wars with a single order. And among them, one stood out with particular notoriety. Joaquín Guzmán Loera, El Chapo, leader of the Sinaloa Cartel. The most famous, elusive, and feared drug trafficker Mexico and the world has ever known. After years of pursuit, he was first captured in 1993. Following an exhausting manhunt carried out by Mexican forces, Guzmán was finally imprisoned. But his arrest didn't mark the end of his empire. On the contrary, from inside Puente Grande, El Chapo found new ways to consolidate his power. The key was money. Millions in bribes turned his cell into a command center. Alcohol, luxurious meals, unrestricted access to women, even extended visits from both his wives and several mistresses. In practice, he lived like a king behind bars. He also had access to phones and communication lines that allowed him to continue controlling every move of his criminal organization from inside the prison. The man who made all of this possible was Damaso López, then Deputy Director of Security at Puente Grande, a key official who soon became his closest ally. El Chapo convinced him with money, gifts, properties, and a salary far beyond any legal income. What began as corruption turned into friendship. Damaso became his trusted man, his connection to the outside world, and his shield within the prison system. From behind the bars, El Chapo didn't just retain control over the Sinaloa cartel. He went further. He gave drug trafficking a strategic shift. He didn't invent the method, but he perfected it. From prison, he oversaw the development of an unprecedented underground infrastructure, a network of tunnels. That was the revolution. Under his leadership, engineers, architects, and excavation specialists were hired. The goal: to build underground corridors with millimetric precision, connecting Mexican territory to key points across the US border. They no longer needed boats or small aircraft, nor to risk shipments on highways. The drugs moved underground, unseen and constant. The business became more efficient and more profitable. The Sinaloa cartel's revenue skyrocketed. In a short time, monthly profits exceeded $20 million. Paradoxically, El Chapo's empire grew more while he was imprisoned than when he was free. The United States, the main target of his operations, began demanding his extradition. The pressure was relentless, not only because of the sheer volume of drugs crossing the border, but because they knew that as long as Guzmán remained in a Mexican prison, he would continue operating. They wanted him behind bars, but on their soil. They knew that only there would he be isolated from his accomplices, far from the corrupt officials who protected him. Mexico, however, refused. They claimed they could contain him, that their system was sufficient. But El Chapo had already shown that no prison, no matter how solid, truly held him. Mexican authorities insisted there was no reason to transfer him. According to them, the national prison system was capable of controlling any inmate, regardless of their power or influence. That position was a relief for Guzmán. He knew that as long as he remained there, everything would stay under his control. However, in 2001, everything changed. The Supreme Court of Justice introduced an initiative that opened the door to a new policy: the extradition of Mexican criminals to the United States. For El Chapo, that news was an alarm. His controlled, bribed, secure world could vanish in an instant if he were sent across the border. There, he would have no allies, no room to maneuver. That's why, as soon as he heard about the proposal, he knew he had to act. And fast. Within weeks, He designed an escape plan. Only a few could know about it. He understood that even the smallest mistake could mean his end. Damaso Lopez, his right-hand man, was the first to be recruited. A fresh bribe sealed the deal. El Chapo shared his intention, and Damaso agreed to help him without hesitation. They chose a date, the 19th of January, 2001. On that day, the number of guards would be reduced exclusively in the area where Guzmán was held. Another key figure was a prison worker nicknamed Chito. His job was routine, collecting inmates' dirty laundry and transporting it in a cart to a delivery van. His role would be crucial. Chito was the perfect link. Invisible to everyone, he went about his duties without raising suspicion. No one imagined that this low-level employee, assigned to the simplest tasks, would become the final piece in one of the boldest escapes in organized crime history. On the 19th of January 2001, the plan was activated. Chito calmly opened Guzmán's cell as if it were part of his usual routine. Then, he helped him climb inside the laundry cart. He covered him with dirty clothes and began pushing with unnerving composure. The operation ran smoothly. The reduced number of guards in that wing made every move easier. But then, something almost ruined everything. As they moved through one of the corridors, Chito stopped at a door controlled by a guard. He approached to request it be opened, and at that moment, the weight of the cart with El Chapo inside caused it to start sliding backward. The cart rolled out of control. If it hit the wall, it could tip over. If it fell, the entire plan would collapse. But Chito reacted in time. He immediately ran and caught the cart just before it hit, then continued his path, never breaking composure. Minutes later, they reached the inner parking lot of the prison. There, a vehicle was waiting with the engine running. El Chapo climbed out of the cart and went straight into the trunk. The driver was part of the plan, one of his girlfriend's bodyguards. When they crossed the main exit, no one stopped them. No inspection, no questions, nothing. The escape was quickly discovered, but the response was slow. Many local police officers were on the Cartel's payroll. No one rushed to start the pursuit. El Chapo was already far away. That delay was crucial. It allowed Guzmán to get away without a trace. By the time the alarm was finally triggered, he was already out of the immediate reach of prison authorities. The news eventually reached the federal police. Unlike the local forces, this unit wasn't so easily bribed. Their reaction was immediate. They mobilized quickly and began the chase. Meanwhile, El Chapo's men were waiting for him at a prearranged meeting point not far from the prison. There, they switched vehicles, from a simple car to the first of several armored ones. Then, they took him to a remote location where a helicopter was waiting with its engine running. Guzmán boarded without delay. They flew to another point, where a second vehicle was ready. The operation was executed with surgical precision. The route included at least 4 location changes, all planned to avoid any chance of tracking. The final stage of the journey brought him to Mexico City. But something unexpected happened there. As they drove through the capital streets, Guzmán noticed something alarming. The car was surrounded. Patrols, motorcycles, official vehicles. Nervous, he asked the driver how they had found him. The answer was surprising but reassuring. "Don't worry, they're ours." What El Chapo thought was an ambush was, in fact, a protection operation. All the agents surrounding him were under his control. The corrupt police were escorting him in broad daylight, as if he were a high-ranking official. He was invisible, untouchable, protected by those who were supposed to capture him. No one would have imagined that Joaquín Guzmán Loera could move through the Mexican capital under police escort. But that's exactly what happened. In broad daylight, surrounded by patrol cars and official motorcycles, he arrived without incident at one of his safe houses. The 2001 escape from Puente Grande wasn't just a blow to the authorities, it was the birth of a myth. For many, El Chapo became an untouchable figure. A man above the law, capable of humiliating the state and outsmarting any system. The Mexican government deployed extraordinary resources to recapture him. Specialized teams, intelligence services, coordination with local forces. None of it was enough. El Chapo remained a fugitive for 14 years. During that time, his empire expanded without limits. He moved between safe houses located in mountainous areas, far from conventional routes and protected by his most loyal men. In those years of clandestine freedom, the Sinaloa cartel reached a scale never seen before. Guzmán directed the cocaine trafficking operation into the United States, generating billions of dollars annually. The organization branched out, dominated entire regions, and wiped out all competition. It even surpassed the legendary Medellin cartel of Pablo Escobar, long considered the largest in the history of drug trafficking. But such power doesn't come quietly. Violence became the norm to maintain control. Especially in northern Mexico, cities near the US border became war zones. These border areas were vital to the drug trade heading north. Control over them meant power, money, and total dominance of the business. That's why the battle was brutal. The Sinaloa cartel, under El Chapo's direct command, turned these cities into battlegrounds. The number of murders skyrocketed. Massacres, disappearances, and massive destruction became part of daily life. The streets were filled with fear. Little by little, Guzmán eliminated every rival gang. One by one, he consolidated his power in the north of the country and positioned himself as the sole and absolute ruler of drug trafficking between Mexico and the United States. For the authorities, it was intolerable. And in 2014, 14 years after his spectacular escape, the pressure reached a new level. Mexican intelligence agencies, this time with the active support of the United States, decided to change tactics. It was no longer just about tracking the leader. They began to monitor his inner circle. Sons, wives, sons-in-law, key collaborators, all were under surveillance. And thanks to this new strategy, they managed to find a fundamental piece: Guzmán's technical assistant, a young Colombian who knew the cartel's internal movements. Intelligence agents managed to convince him to collaborate. His information was crucial. Through him, they infiltrated the encrypted communication network of the Sinaloa cartel. They broke through the system's security and, for the first time in years, tracked El Chapo's exact location. He was in Sinaloa, in one of his safe houses, right in the territory he controlled as the absolute boss of the narco world. The location was confirmed. It was one of the safe houses used by Guzmán, designed to withstand any attempt at capture. The operation was scheduled with precision. The 17th of February 2014. That day, Mexican special forces, backed by DEA agents, completely surrounded the property. But what they found was no ordinary house. Behind the front door was a second barrier, a heavy steel door. The agents began pounding on it relentlessly, trying to break through. Meanwhile, inside, El Chapo was sound asleep. Everything changed in seconds. His assistant burst into the room yelling, "The army is at the door." Guzmán jumped out of bed. The echo of pounding confirmed it was real, not a drill. It was a raid. From the outside, the special forces could see shadows moving inside. That pushed them to intensify the assault. The windows were small and reinforced, limiting entry options. The entire structure was designed to resist. Finally, after several minutes, they broke through the steel door. They entered with weapons raised, shouting clear commands. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. But the unexpected happened. The house was empty. They searched room by room, checked every corner, every hiding place. There was no one. The signs of movement had been real. But now there was no trace of Guzmán or his men. The raid had failed, or at least, so it seemed. The shadows the agents saw from outside were not an illusion. Guzmán had been there when the raid began. But the moment his assistant warned him, he didn't hide. He escaped. He went straight to the bathroom, not to lock himself in, but because he knew exactly what to do. Beneath the bathtub was his exit route. An escape tunnel built with military precision. The Sinaloa cartel hadn't only perfected the use of tunnels for drug trafficking, they had also turned them into escape routes. Every one of his safe houses had an underground exit for situations like this. Guzmán activated the secret mechanism quickly. Behind the bathroom mirror was a tiny opening. He inserted a pin into the exact point, which triggered an electric current that released the bolt holding the bathtub to the floor. The bathtub, supported by hydraulic arms, lifted effortlessly. Beneath it, a tunnel awaited him. He entered, closed the entrance behind him, and disappeared. That's why the special forces took so long to understand what had happened. While they were searching every inch of the house, El Chapo was already several meters away, moving underground. He wasn't alone. He escaped with his wife and closest assistant. Together, they moved through the tunnel toward freedom. While above them, agents were still searching in the wrong place. The escape was a complete success. Guzmán, his wife, and his assistant were already at a safe distance when the special forces finally discovered the secret entrance beneath the bathtub. Instead of hiding in his usual mountain refuges, El Chapo chose an unexpected destination. He didn't seek isolation. He preferred to blend in among the crowd. He traveled to Mazatlan, a coastal city known for its tourism, beaches, and laid-back atmosphere, a place where no one would expect to find the most wanted man on the continent. But there was something he didn't know. His communication network had been compromised. El Chapo believed his previous location had been discovered by chance, unaware that every step he took was being monitored. His phone was tapped. Every conversation was tracked. Just 5 days after his escape, on the 22nd of February 2014, Mexican authorities and U.S. agents located his exact whereabouts, the Miramar Hotel, right in the heart of Mazatlan's tourist district. The operation was swift and precise. They surrounded the building, entered his room, and captured him without resistance. There were no bodyguards, no protection. In the photo taken after his arrest, Guzmán appears disoriented. He couldn't understand how they had found him so easily. His trust in anonymity had been his downfall. After his second arrest, he was transferred to Altiplano prison, considered the most secure in all of Mexico. You might wonder why he wasn't sent there after his first arrest. The answer is simple. In 1993, when he was first captured, Altiplano was still under development. It didn't yet have the maximum security conditions it would acquire years later. But by 2014, everything had changed. Altiplano had become a true fortress, a military base disguised as a prison. The security measures were overwhelming. Constant patrols, specialized teams, and an environment designed to withstand any escape or rescue attempt. The outer perimeter was surrounded by a network of watchtowers. Each tower was manned by guards armed with high-caliber rifles, ready to repel any threat. The prison walls weren't simple fences. They were composed of multiple layers of steel and concrete, over a meter thick. Trenches dug around the complex added another layer of defense. According to some sources, armored vehicles were even installed inside the facility. The entire complex was a no-fly zone, with reports suggesting anti-aircraft weaponry had been deployed to prevent any aerial assault. Communications were also completely blocked. No mobile phones could function inside the prison. And most importantly, the staff had been selected with extreme rigor. Corruption, at least on the surface, had no place there. Altiplano housed the most dangerous criminals in the country. None of them had ever managed to escape until El Chapo arrived. From the moment Guzmán walked through the doors of Altiplano, he knew he couldn't stay there for long. His greatest fear wasn't the cell, it was extradition. He knew that if he was sent to the United States, his power would come to a definitive end. With no access to mobile phones or personal communication systems, his only link to the outside world was through authorized visits. Only 2 people were allowed to see him: his lawyer, Oscar López, and his third wife, Emma Coronel, a young woman 32 years his junior, whom he had married in 2007. Through her, he began sending encrypted instructions, discreet messages directed to his sons, and associates all key figures in the cartel. Although none of his 4 sons assumed leadership directly after his capture, they still maintained operational influence within the organization. But the most decisive figure was someone else. Damaso Lopez. An old acquaintance of Guzmán, he had been Deputy Security Director at Puente Grande Prison, the very man who allowed him to control everything from his cell in the 1990 seconds. After the infamous 2001 escape, Damaso was dismissed and named an accomplice, which permanently removed him from the prison system. That's when El Chapo offered him a new life, a position within the cartel. Since then, Lopez had risen through the ranks to become his right-hand man. With Guzmán's second imprisonment, Damaso became the new operational head of the Sinaloa cartel. From prison, El Chapo reestablished contact with him through Emma Coronel, also with his sons. They all began working on an urgent mission to get him out of prison before Mexican authorities could execute his extradition to the United States. Time was ticking, and he knew it. The fear was real. Guzmán understood that extradition was closer than ever, and he couldn't allow it. Damaso Lopez and El Chapo's sons began to devise a plan, a meticulous operation, designed down to the last detail. Damaso, with his experience as a former official in a high-security prison, knew the structures and weaknesses of the penitentiary system inside and out. That advantage would prove to be key. Meanwhile, inside Altiplano, Guzmán lived under constant surveillance. He spent almost the entire day in his cell. He was allowed only 1 hour of outdoor time daily. A GPS tracker was strapped to his ankle 24 hours a day, and he was monitored by cameras even inside his cell. The only area without direct surveillance was the shower, hidden behind a small wall that provided some privacy. It was a minor detail, but in an escape, every detail counts. He knew the odds were slim. Escaping from Altiplano was virtually impossible. Still, he decided to try. And since it was Guzmán, one element was inevitable: a tunnel. But this time, the plan was different. It wouldn't be dug from inside the prison. The tunnel had to begin outside from the external world, cutting beneath the entire facility and reaching his cell undetected. An unprecedented project. Never before had there been a tunnel dug from the outside into a maximum security prison to free an inmate. Now, the first step was to acquire a property. A piece of land located close enough to the prison to allow digging without raising suspicion, but also far enough to avoid drawing attention. The plan was just beginning, and it was as ambitious as it was risky. The location had to be perfect, close enough to the Altiplano perimeter, but far enough to avoid notice, and that wasn't easy. The prison was located in a completely isolated area, surrounded by agricultural fields and empty lands. There were no nearby buildings, no urban activity, just vast open land under constant surveillance. After an exhaustive search, Guzmán's team found a promising site, an abandoned construction lot about 1.5 kilometers from the prison. It had likely been used by local farmers and was semi-hidden among vegetation and uneven terrain. It was perfect. They acquired the property and registered it under the name of someone with a clean record, someone who wouldn't raise suspicion. With that, they secured a legal and discreet starting point from which to begin excavation. But the next challenge was even greater. Even if they managed to dig a tunnel over 1 kilometer long, how would they know exactly where to direct it inside the prison? Altiplano was a complex structure, monitored from every angle. Guzmán's cell was under constant surveillance. Any miscalculation, any deviation, would ruin the entire operation. There was only one spot with a minimal chance of success: the shower, protected by a small wall and outside the direct reach of the cameras. That was the target. The tunnel's exit had to emerge precisely in that corner. But reaching it from the outside, over 1,500 meters away, and without any margin for error, required more than intuition. It required a high-precision solution. Digging blindly was not an option. Locating the tiny space behind the shower wall without any visual reference or detailed blueprint was nearly impossible. Until Guzmán came up with an ingenious solution. He remembered he was wearing a GPS tracker on his ankle, imposed by the authorities. If they managed to place a second GPS, hidden in the exact area where the tunnel was meant to emerge, the diggers could align their work with surgical precision. The idea was simple: smuggle in a GPS device and place it discreetly in the shower area. From the outside, the engineers could read the signal and aim the tunnel directly at that point. But there was one problem. Altiplano was the most fortified prison in the country. Smuggling in an electronic device, no matter how small, was a feat in itself. The security checks were rigorous. Every item was inspected. Any suspicious device would be confiscated immediately. Then came an alternative: hiding the GPS inside a wristwatch. A common item, non-threatening in appearance. Something that could pass through all checkpoints without raising alarms. Guzmán's cell was under constant surveillance. Any miscalculation, any deviation, would ruin the entire operation. There was only one spot with a minimal chance of success: the shower, protected by a small wall and outside the direct reach of the cameras. That was the target. The message was delivered by his wife, Emma Coronel, who brought him the watch during one of her visits. The guards inspected it as part of routine procedure, but found nothing unusual. The watch passed. And with it, the GPS that would allow the tunnel to be directed precisely to the cell of the most closely watched prisoner in Mexico. Thanks to the hidden GPS signal, El Chapo's men were able to pinpoint the exact location behind the shower wall. That detail changed everything. They had already started digging from the acquired building, but now, with the precise coordinates, they could adjust the tunnel's trajectory and aim it directly at Guzmán's cell with complete accuracy. What followed was a remarkable feat of engineering. The tunnel descended 10 meters underground and stretched more than 1.5 kilometers to reach the prison. From the entrance, dozens of wooden supports could be seen reinforcing the structure. Everything was calculated. Nothing was improvised. This wasn't just any tunnel. It was a professional construction, designed to the highest technical standard ever seen in a prison escape. To maintain airflow, they installed a complete ventilation system. Along the underground corridor, they laid pipes connected to an air pump located at the tunnel's entrance. This machine continuously supplied fresh air, ensuring the workers could operate for hours. The team was small, but steady. It's estimated that between 10 and 12 people worked day and night, in shifts, for weeks. Every meter of excavation required precision, stamina, and absolute silence. And there were still more critical components needed for this tunnel to become the most sophisticated ever built in the history of organized crime. In addition to ventilation, the tunnel required lighting. They couldn't rely on flashlights or makeshift solutions. This was an industrial-scale project. They installed thousands of light bulbs along the passageway, connected to an electrical system powered by a hidden generator at the entrance. This generator was camouflaged with a concrete structure that looked like a workbench, with no visible clues as to what was really happening below. Nothing was left to chance. From the outside, the brick building looked abandoned. There were no signs of machinery, no piles of dirt, no suspicious movements. All the material extracted from underground tons of sand was carefully packed and disposed of without leaving a trace. It was a silent, precise, and massive operation. Countless meters of piping, thousands of light bulbs, tons of debris, all handled with absolute discretion. The most astonishing part is that the excavation was taking place just 1.5 kilometers from the prison, a completely exposed area, flat terrain, and constant surveillance from guard towers. Yet no suspicions were raised. No guard detected the movement. No patrol intercepted the work. No one, during all that time, discovered what was being built right under their noses. The scale of the operation was enormous, but so was its ability to remain invisible. Everything pointed to El Chapo's crew having planned every detail with surgical precision. No loose ends, Not a single careless move. Inside the tunnel, they even installed a rail system. On it, they placed a custom-built excavation cart powered by a small motor integrated with a motorcycle. Its purpose was twofold: to transport dirt during construction, and, when the time came, to help their leader escape. While his men dug tirelessly, Joaquín Guzmán lived with growing anxiety. He knew his extradition was imminent. He sent constant messages to his team asking for updates. Why was it taking so long? What was still missing? From the outside, they replied calmly. They reminded him that this was no ordinary operation. Every meter of soil dug required precision. Every step had to be executed with extreme care. One mistake could ruin everything. Finally, in June 2015, Guzmán received the news he had been waiting for. The tunnel was nearly complete, and he personally chose the date of the escape: the 4th of July, Independence Day in the United States. It wasn't a random choice. For him, escaping on that day was a symbolic act. He wanted to send a direct message to the U.S. authorities that not even on their most patriotic day could they stop his escape. Even though his entire fortune was fueled by the American market, his disdain for that country's government was deep. He knew how badly they wanted him in their prisons, and that motivated him even more. However, the preparations were not yet complete. The tunnel needed final adjustments, and the operation was postponed just by a few days. The day finally arrived. It was the 11th of July 2015, the chosen date to execute the boldest escape in modern drug trafficking history. Guzmán had been locked up in Altiplano for almost 16 months. That night, the surveillance cameras in his cell caught him watching a comedy series on his tablet. The volume was high, and that was no coincidence. He was trying to mask the sounds coming from underground, where his men were making final adjustments. He kept getting up, walking around the cell, checking the clock, waiting for a signal. At 8:10 he sat on the edge of the bed, put on his shoes, and walked toward the shower, the only place without camera coverage. From that moment, he vanished. A hatch hidden under the shower opened. Guzmán descended down a vertical ladder and entered the underground tunnel. There, his wife's brother was waiting for him, who pointed to the improvised vehicle, a small motorized platform on rails. He got on the cart and sped through the tunnel. At the other end, he emerged into the brick building. On the surface, a quad bike awaited him. He hopped on with one of his men and took off down a cleared path. Meanwhile, everything at the prison remained calm. It took 40 minutes before the guards noticed something strange. When they checked the cameras, they discovered that Guzmán was not in his cell. They immediately went to inspect it. At first, they thought he might be hiding behind the shower wall, but what they found was the tunnel entrance. Alarms were activated. A state of emergency was declared, but it was already too late. El Chapo had escaped, and by then, he was already far away. The escape continued with surgical precision. After exiting the tunnel and leaving the prison behind, Guzmán headed toward a large truck. He climbed into the trailer, and his men securely locked the hatch. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary cargo unit. No one would have suspected it was transporting the most wanted man in the country. The vehicle drove for 2 hours until it reached a city called San Juan in the state of Querétaro. There, the next stage of the plan awaited: a private jet. The pilot was a trusted collaborator with years of experience working for the cartel. Everything had been planned, even potential tracking scenarios. To throw off the authorities, 2 jets had been arranged. The first, with Guzmán aboard, would fly to the actual destination. The second would take off minutes later in the opposite direction, to divert attention from any force attempting to intercept him. Once in the air, El Chapo was no longer in immediate danger. He decided to take refuge in one of his most inaccessible properties, a safe house deep in the mountains of Sinaloa. Among his men, the place was known as Heaven, not for its beauty, but for its extreme level of protection. The structure resembled a fortress: perimeter security, escape tunnels, encrypted communications. It was, without a doubt, the safest place in the country for him. But his escape wasn't just a personal victory. It was an international humiliation for the Mexican state. Just a year earlier, the authorities had publicly boasted about his capture. They had presented it as a historic triumph in the fight against drug trafficking. Now, that same criminal had escaped from the most fortified prison in the nation, underground. And the worst was yet to come. Because if Guzmán had remained quiet, hidden in the mountains, perhaps no one would have found him again. And that was his great weakness. Instead of staying hidden, El Chapo began moving again. He traveled from city to city. He visited operational centers, gathered his men, and gave direct orders. For him, maintaining presence was essential. Not only to lead his organization, but to preserve his image of absolute power within the cartel. But that need for control was also his mistake. This time, Mexican authorities, with full technical support from US agencies, intensified the manhunt. Bilateral cooperation reached unprecedented levels. From Washington, tracking tools, interception software, and state-of-the-art surveillance equipment were deployed. Thanks to that technology, Mexican intelligence managed to locate a house in Los Mochis, in northern Sinaloa. There, they detected suspicious movements directly linked to Guzmán's circle. The signs were clear. The team began intercepting internal communications. The conversations were encrypted, but the patterns were evident. One key word appeared frequently. La abuela, the grandmother. Phrases like, "Get ready, the grandmother is coming," were repeated constantly. It wasn't hard to guess that the alias referred to a high-ranking figure. All suspicions pointed in one direction: El Chapo. Confirmation didn't take long. The next day, a convoy of 3 vehicles entered directly into the property's garage. The intelligence agents, watching from a hidden position, couldn't see the occupants, but everything indicated a high-security operation. The wiretaps continued, and among the voices intercepted, one stood out above the rest. It was his. There was no doubt. El Chapo Guzmán was there, inside that house, and this time, they wouldn't let him escape easily. On the 8th of January 2016, 6 months after his escape from Altiplano, the Mexican authorities decided to act. At dawn, a special forces team, backed by DEA agents, surrounded the house in Los Mochis. The operation began with a direct assault, fast, coordinated. The reaction was immediate. A violent shootout broke out between the agents and El Chapo's men. The crossfire was intense. The casualties were on the cartel side. Among the special forces members, some were injured, but there were no fatalities. The operation had been planned with military precision. When the battle ended, the agents stormed the property. They searched room by room, but Guzmán was no longer there. He had escaped. Again. The house had a subterranean escape system. A mirror, installed on one of the walls, concealed a secret entrance. Behind it, a perfectly dug tunnel connected the property to a remote exit point. While his men were fighting law enforcement, Guzmán and one of his aides were already traveling through the tunnel. Upon exiting, they hijacked a vehicle passing nearby. But this time, the area was under heavy patrol. Checkpoints had been activated throughout the city. About 20 kilometers from the house, 4 federal police officers intercepted the vehicle. Inside was El Chapo. He tried the usual, offering immediate bribes. But this time, it didn't work. The officers refused. Faced with rejection, Guzmán lost control. He threw threats, insults, tried to intimidate them. Nothing worked. He was photographed on the spot, and the image was sent directly to their commander. The response was clear. Special forces were on their way. But they weren't alone. They also received a warning that the cartel was mobilizing. El Chapo's men were preparing for an offensive. The order was clear: move the prisoner to a nearby motel and take cover in case of a possible attack. The 4 federal agents and Guzmán took refuge in one of the motel's rooms. From there, they began monitoring the situation, expecting the worst. After a few minutes, the silence was broken by a distant sound. Vehicles approaching. The growing roar of engines formed a kind of procession, slowly heading toward them. El Chapo, confident, flashed a sarcastic smile. "Now you probably wish you had accepted my offer," he told the officers, convinced that his men were coming to rescue him. But his expression changed completely when he saw who was really arriving. The convoy wasn't from the cartel. It was the army. Dozens of military vehicles, special forces, and tactical units surrounded the motel completely. They sealed every entrance, every possible escape route. Guzmán's gunmen, upon seeing such a deployment, didn't even attempt to get close. They knew it was pointless. The area was completely locked down. In that moment, El Chapo was captured for the 3rd time. He was taken back to Altiplano prison, the same facility from which he had escaped a year and a half earlier. But this time, the conditions were different. Surveillance was extreme. Still, even after being recaptured and exposed to the world, Guzmán didn't abandon his deepest instinct to plan another escape. He sent messages to his network. He requested a new operation, and according to insiders in his circle, preparations had once again begun. The most disturbing part was that they planned to do it just like before. Another tunnel. Another impossible escape turned real. But this time, Mexican authorities were not willing to repeat the same mistakes. They had reached an inevitable conclusion. The only way to prevent a 4th escape was to send him far away, to the United States. Guzmán had already escaped from Puente Grande in 2001, remaining a fugitive for 14 years. He also slipped away through a tunnel hidden under a bathtub in one of his houses. And once again, he fled from the country's most secure prison, Altiplano, through a tunnel dug from the outside. How many more times could he outsmart the system? In Mexico, surrounded by his loyalists, he would always find a way out. In the United States, that would be impossible. The extradition process was expedited. The judicial system worked with maximum urgency. So much so that the judge in charge of the case was assassinated in October 2016. A clear message. Even so, the process continued. And finally, in January 2017, the day arrived. Without prior notice, a group of soldiers entered Guzmán's cell. They restrained him, tied him with straps, and took him to the prison yard, where a military helicopter was already waiting. Still unaware of his destination, he was transferred to a special aircraft. The flight took off without announcements. Only when it landed did El Chapo realize what was happening. He was in New York. He looked around, confused. He asked one of the DEA agents, "Where am I?" The response was direct. "You're in New York." And there he was, the most powerful drug lord in history. Reduced. Disarmed. With tears in his eyes. A scene that would remain forever in judicial records. His trial on U.S. soil was beginning. One of the longest and most high-profile proceedings ever held in a federal court. Finally, in 2019, the verdict was delivered. Joaquín Guzmán Loera was sentenced to life imprisonment plus an additional 30 years. His fate was sealed definitively. He is currently held at the ADX Florence Federal Prison in Colorado. Considered the most secure and strictest in the United States, this facility is known for housing the most dangerous inmates in the system. Here, each inmate is kept under almost total isolation. El Chapo spends 23 hours a day in a reinforced concrete cell. He is entitled to 1 hour of daily recreation, but only within enclosed facilities and under constant armed surveillance. Interaction with other inmates is non-existent. Human contact, nearly zero. The security is absolute. He has probably thought about escaping more than once. But this time, there are no tunnels, no accomplices, no bribes. Only walls, surveillance, and silence. And perhaps, in the solitude of that cell, he has realized that his power, his empire, and his legend are now behind him. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you're into gripping crime stories, unexpected twists, and figures who defied entire governments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications. We have many more stories to tell. See you in the next video.